Hey, it's good to have you here tonight. I hope you found a quiet corner, maybe with a warm cup in your hands. You know, nights like this always make me think that the world slows down just enough for us to finally hear the things we've been carrying inside. Tonight's letter isn't an easy one. It comes from someone who grew up in a house filled with the smell of alcohol, the thud of footsteps down the hallway, and the kind of silence that made you hold your breath, because you never knew what might come next. She learned young that feelings were dangerous, that joy could be snatched away in a heartbeat, and pain didn't need a reason to show up. So she built herself a shield, not of bricks and locks, but of numbness. In her memories, the kitchen light at night was always too bright, catching every chip in the mugs, every scratch on the table. Behind closed doors, muffled voices rose and fell like waves against the shore. Now, she writes this letter not to blame, not even to forgive, but to understand. To trace the line from that cold kitchen to the woman she's become. Someone learning slowly and tenderly what it means to truly feel again. If you've ever kept yourself safe by feeling nothing, if you've ever mistaken numbness for strength, then, my friend, her story may feel a little too close. So stay with me, dim and light. Let the dark be gentle. And together, we'll walk through the rooms of her childhood, where the air still carries the scent of yesterday. Tonight, I'm here, inner of my small apartment. The rain is tapping softly against the window. There's a warm lamp beside me, its light spilling just far enough to make the room feel smaller, safer. On the table, a chipped porcelain mug. The tea inside has gone cold, but the faint scent of chamomile still lingers. You know, for most of my life, I never noticed things like this. The way light falls on a wall, or how the air continues when rain begins to fall harder. Back then, I trained myself not to notice anything, because noticing meant feeling, and feeling was dangerous. When you grow up in a house where the smell of alcohol hangs heavier than the air, where footsteps can be slow and quiet one moment, and a storm the next, you learn to erase your reactions before they ever reach your face. I got very good at that. Too good. Now, I'm sitting here, trying to let the rain in, trying to feel it. It's harder than you'd think, especially when you've spent your childhood building walls you can't even see anymore. When I was 8, the living room felt like a battlefield, not because of shouting, but because of the silence that followed. It was a heavy silence, heavier than any scream could ever be. I would sit on the worn carpet, my fingers tracing the faded patterns. The television would be on, but the volume turned down so low you could barely hear the voices. Some nights, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the soft clink of a bottle against the table. There was a smell too, beer mixed with something stale, something that made the air feel thick. Without even realizing, I'd hold my breath, as if not breathing could make me invisible. Looking back, I see how much of my childhood was spent in waiting. Waiting for footsteps, waiting for the door to close, waiting for the night to decide if it would be calm or cruel. And when you wait like that, there was a small window in my bedroom. It faced the narrow alley behind our house. At night, I would lie on my stomach, chin resting on folded arms, watching the neighbor's light flicker on and off. Sometimes, I pretended it was a secret signal meant just for me. The air through that window carried the smell of damp pavement and cigarette smoke. Sometimes, the faint echo of music from a parked car down the street. Slow, drawn-out notes that made the night feel a little less hollow. I think I clung to those moments because they reminded me there was a world beyond our walls. Inside, the air was tight, shrinking. Even my own voice felt small. Some nights I'd whisper to myself just to hear something that belonged to me. It didn't fix anything, but it kept me from disappearing completely. Even now I notice little things, a light spilling under a closed door, the way a song drifts through an open window. I still build entire worlds out of crumbs. One night stays with me more than the rest. The power went out during a storm. I was 10. The wind rattled the windows, rain slammed against the roof like hundreds of fingers drumming at once. For a moment, the dark felt peaceful. No harsh light, no glint of glass, no sharp edges to the night. But then, the scrape of a chair on the kitchen floor, slow footsteps, each one heavier than the last. I knew then the storm outside wasn't the only one I'd face that night. I sat on my bed, knees tucked to my chest, listening to the mix of rain and the clink of bottles, the air thick with wet wood and alcohol. Even now, storms pull me back to that night, to the knot in my stomach, to the quiet that wasn't safe at all. By the time I turned 12, I had mastered the art of staying out of sight. After school, I'd slip into my room without a sound, drop my bag, close the door, and sit by the window, watching shadows stretch across the walls. The hallway outside always smelled faintly of old wood and spilled beer. Some days, the sound of a television drifted from the living room, a game show host laughing too loud for the hour. Other days, nothing but the creak of the house settling. I thought invisibility was safety. If I wasn't seen, I couldn't be hurt. But being unseen comes with a price. You start to wonder if you exist at all. I'd press my palm against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of distant traffic, imagining myself inside one of those cars, headed somewhere warm, somewhere I could belong. I didn't know it then, but I was already learning to live inside my head, because the world outside my door didn't feel like mine. Sometimes there were good days, or at least quieter ones. A morning where the kitchen smelled of toast instead of liquor. A night when the only sound was the soft hum of the radio in the corner. I'd cling to those moments like they were proof that things could be different, even if they never lasted. It's strange how the smallest kindness can stretch across years in your memory. A plate of pancakes, a gentle pat on the head, the rare sound of my father humming a tune he liked. But kindness in that house was a flicker, here for a second, gone before you could believe in it. I learned not to expect it, only to notice it when it came. And maybe that's why, even now, I pay attention to the smallest things, because sometimes they're the only light you get. There was an old armchair in the corner of the living room. The fabric was worn thin, its faded flowers barely visible anymore. I used to sit there when no one was home. The cushions sank deep, swallowing me like a warm pocket of air. From that chair I could see the whole room, the dusty bookshelf, the coffee table with a ring-shaped stain from years of glasses left too long, and through the half-open blinds, thin stripes of sunlight stretching across the floor. It felt almost safe in those hours, as if the house could be gentle if it wanted to. But the sound of a key in the door always broke that illusion. The chair would no longer feel soft. The light would seem too sharp. I'd slip away before anyone could see me there, back to my room, back to my corner of quiet. I wonder now, if I loved that chair, or if I loved the version of the house that only existed when it was empty. Part 8. The kitchen was a different kind of memory. Not warm, not welcoming. The tiles were cold under my bare feet. The smell of burnt toast seemed to live in the air. Some mornings there'd be the sharp pop of a bottle cap hitting the counter. Other times just the quiet shuffle of feet, and the scrape of a chair being pulled out. It was in that kitchen that I learned how to read a room without anyone saying a word. A glance, a sigh, the way someone's hand lingered too long on a bottle. That skill kept me safe, but it also kept me small. Even now, I catch myself scanning people's faces, listening for what they're not saying. It's a habit born in those tiled mornings, and I don't know if it will ever leave me. There was a park 3 blocks from our house. Nothing special, just a patch of grass, a few tired swings, and a single bench with peeling paint. I used to walk there alone on Saturday mornings. The air smelled cleaner than at home, tinged with fresh-cut grass from a neighbor's lawn. I'd sit on the swings, pushing myself slowly, listening to the faint creak of the chains. Sometimes a stray dog would wander by, stop to look at me, then keep going like we both had our own roads to follow. I think I loved the park because it didn't ask anything of me. It didn't demand I speak. It didn't punish me for being quiet. In that small, forgotten space, I felt more real than I did at home. And yet, I never stayed long, because no matter where I went, home was always waiting, pulling me back like a shadow I couldn't outrun. That's the thing about growing up in a place like that. You learn to find peace in temporary shelters. There was one tree in the park I always sat under. Its trunk was thick, its bark rough and warm in the afternoon sun. I'd lean my back against it, feeling the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath me. Above, the leaves whispered in the wind, and sometimes a single one would break free and drift into my lap. I'd trace the veins of that leaf with my fingertip, imagining they were tiny roads leading somewhere safe, somewhere far. It's strange how a tree can feel like a friend when you have no one else. But that tree couldn't follow me home. It couldn't keep the nights from coming. Still, I like to think it kept my secrets, all the words I never said out loud. Maybe that's why, even now, I pause under big trees when I pass them. I think they remember me. Nights were always the hardest. The air inside the house felt heavier after dark, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. From my bed, I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. The smell of cigarettes would sometimes drift in from the porch, mixed with the metallic tang of the old radiator. Some nights were loud, doors slamming, voices raised without warning. Other nights were silent, the kind of silence that makes you strain to hear something, anything. That's when I learned that fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits in the quiet. I would pull the blanket over my head, pretending the thin fabric was armor. And in those moments, I promised myself that one day I would live somewhere where nights felt light, somewhere the dark wasn't dangerous. I didn't know how I'd get there, but I knew I couldn't stay where shadows had teeth. On the rare nights when I couldn't sleep, I'd sneak to the kitchen for a glass of water. Sundays had their own kind of heaviness. The morning light would slip through the curtains, dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts. I'd lie in bed, listening to the muffled clink of dishes in the kitchen. The faint smell of coffee would drift down the hallway, mixed with the scent of something frying in the pan, eggs maybe, or potatoes. It should have been comforting, but in our house, Sunday mornings always carried an edge, like a quiet before the storm. Sometimes the voices stayed low, a conversation that never turned sharp. Other times, the calm would crack without warning, and the day would unravel before it even began. I learned not to trust the softness of a Sunday. It could vanish too quickly. Even now, when the light falls just right on a Sunday morning, a part of me tenses, waiting for the break. It's strange how even peace can feel dangerous when you've seen it turn. There was a cupboard in the kitchen where we kept the good plates. White porcelain with a thin gold rim. We only used them for guests, and even then, only for guests who mattered. I used to run my finger along the smooth edge of a plate, tracing the delicate shimmer of gold. It amazed me that something so fragile was treated with such care, while people in the same house were not. Those plates never chipped. They were handled gently, washed carefully, stacked neatly. I used to wish someone would see me that way, as something worth holding carefully. But in that house, care was saved for objects, not for feelings. Maybe that's why now, I drink from the nicest cups I own, even on an ordinary day, because beauty, like kindness, shouldn't be kept locked away. In the afternoons, I'd sometimes sit by the front window, watching the street. The sunlight would slide across the floor, slow and lazy, catching on the dust motes in the air. Outside, I could hear the occasional crunch of tires on gravel, or the faint chatter of neighbors walking home from the store. I'd make up stories about the people passing by, where they were going, what kind of lives they had. It was easier than thinking about my own. There was a strange comfort in being on the inside looking out, a kind of safety in the distance. But it was also lonely. I could see the world moving, but I couldn't touch it. Sometimes, I'd press my palm to the glass, feeling the faint warmth of the sun on the other side. A reminder that there was light out there, even if it didn't reach me fully. I think that's how I learned to want quietly, from behind the window. Once, in gentle 1.2s, sat by that same window and watched the snow fall for hours. The world outside turned soft and white, every sound muffled, as if the whole street was holding its breath. I remember the way the cold air seeped through the cracks in the frame, making the tip of my nose sting. I could smell the faint scent of wet wool from my sweater, still damp from the morning walk to school. There was an old armchair in the corner of the living room. Its fabric was worn thin in places, the pattern faded almost to nothing. Sometimes I'd curl up there with a book, pretending to read while really just listening to the small sounds of the house, the hum of the fridge, the occasional groan of the floorboards. The chair smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, like the perfume my mother used to wear years before. It was the closest thing in that house to comfort. I think I loved it because it didn't ask for anything. It didn't judge how I sat or whether I spoke. It just held me. Sometimes I wonder if we all deserve a place like that, a corner of the world that holds us without condition. For me, it was that old chair. For someone else, it might be a person. But I've learned that people who feel like armchairs are rare. Music was another hiding place. When the house felt too loud or too silent, I'd slip on my headphones and disappear. The first song I remember loving was one I found on an old cassette in a drawer. The tape hissed when it played, and the singer's voice sounded far away, like they were calling from another room. I'd lie on the floor, the cord from the headphones stretched tight to the player, and let the melody carry me somewhere softer. It didn't matter that I couldn't understand all the words. What mattered was the feeling, the way it seemed to know me, to see me. Even now, when I hear that song, I'm back on that floor, eyes closed, breathing with the rhythm. Sometimes I think music saved me, not in a dramatic, movie scene way, but in small, steady doses, enough to remind me I was still here. And sometimes that's all survival really is. There was a hallway in our house that always seemed darker than it should be. No matter how bright the day was, the lights never reached all the way down. I used to walk through it quickly, my footsteps soft on the worn carpet. The walls smelled faintly of old paint and damp wood, and if you listened closely, you could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the next room. It wasn't that the hallway scared me. It was more the way it felt like a place in between. Not here, not there. A space you moved through but never stayed. Looking back, I think that's what my childhood felt like too. A long hallway where I was always walking toward something but never quite arriving. You learn not to linger in those in-between places. You keep moving, even if you don't know where you're going. Now, whenever I find myself in a hallway that's too quiet, I feel that old urge to rush through. Some shadows stay with you, even after you stepped into the light. The kitchen table was the heart of the house, but not in the way most people mean it. It wasn't a place for laughter or shared meals. It was where bills piled up, where half-finished cups of coffee went cold, where arguments started quietly and ended the same way. The wood was scratched from years of use, rings of water staining the surface, the smell of old coffee grounds lingering in the air. I'd sit there sometimes when no one was around, running my fingers over the grooves in the wood. Little scars, marking time in their own quiet way. I used to wish those marks could speak. I imagined they'd tell me stories about moments before I was old enough to remember. Now, I think the table would simply say it had seen everything and survived it. And maybe, in its own silent way, so did I. At night, the house had its own language, the creak of the stairs settling, the soft hum of the heater kicking on. Sometimes I'd lie awake and listen to the wind rattling the loose window pane in my room. It would whistle low, then fade, like it was breathing with me. I could smell the faint scent of cold metal from the radiator, mixed with the old cotton of my blanket. That smell still finds me sometimes, in places I least expect. I think I clung to those sounds and smells because they were constant. They didn't change mood. They didn't disappear without warning. In a life where people could turn on you in a moment, consistency became its own kind of love. Even now, when a night is quiet enough, I find myself listening. Not for voices, not for footsteps, just for the hum that says, "You're still here." Sometimes that's all you need to make it through till morning. This was one place I could breathe, the small patch of grass behind the shed. It was hidden, tucked between the back fence and the old wooden wall. In summer, the air smelled like sun-warmed earth and crushed clover. I'd sit there with my knees pulled up, watching ants trace invisible roads through the dirt. Sometimes I'd hear the muffled slam of a door from the house, or the faint echo of raised voices, but out there it was just background noise. That little patch of grass was my proof that the world could hold pockets of peace, even when the rest of it felt sharp. It's strange how small a safe place can be, sometimes no bigger than the space your own body takes up. I think that's why I can find peace now in the smallest moments. A warm cup between my hands, the sound of rain on the roof. Because once you've learned to live in a patch of grass, you never stop looking for it. I remember the first time I realized I had stopped expecting anyone to ask how I was. It wasn't sadness I felt, it was emptiness. I was sitting on the back steps, the wood warm from the afternoon sun. The faint smell of gasoline from the old lawnmower drifted over, mixed with the sharp scent of freshly cut grass. Somewhere a television played too loud. The canned laughter felt out of place, like it had wandered into the wrong house. I remember thinking, this is what invisible feels like. Not hated, not loved, just unseen. And once you believe you're invisible, you start to behave like it. You speak less, you take up less space, you learn to fold yourself small. Even now, when someone asks me sincerely how I'm doing, it takes me a second to answer. Because part of me still wonders if they're really talking to me. In my teenage years, I became an expert at slipping away. Not running, that would have been noticed, just fading. At your gatherings, I'd linger in doorways, blending into the background. The smell of roasted meat, sweet pies cooling on the counter, and the low hum of overlapping conversations would wrap around me like a blanket I couldn't quite feel. I'd watch people laugh, clink glasses, share stories with gestures so wide I thought they might knock the walls down. I wanted to join in, but by then, I didn't know how. When you've been quiet long enough, your voice forgets the path back out. So I stayed in my corner, smiling when someone's eyes landed on me, nodding at the right times. A ghost, perfectly polite. It's taken years to realize that disappearing in plain sight is still disappearing, and that some of the hardest goodbyes are to the versions of ourselves we left standing in the corner. There was a night when the silence in the house felt heavier than the walls. It pressed in, filling every corner, every breath. I sat on the edge of my bed, the sheet cool beneath my hands. From the hallway, a faint flicker of light leaped through the crack under my door, the television in the living room left on. I could smell the lingering trace of cigarette smoke mixed with the stale scent of leftover beer cans. It was the kind of smell that clung to you, followed you into your dreams. That night I remember wishing someone would knock, not to fix anything, not to say the right words, just to make me feel less alone in that room. No one did, And so I learned that sometimes the most painful part of loneliness isn't the emptiness itself, it's realizing no one even knows you're in it. That was the night I started telling myself stories, just to hear a voice in the dark. By the time I was old enough to leave, the house had already seeped into me. I carried it in my posture, in the way I scanned a room before speaking. I remember packing my things in silence, folding clothes into an old duffel bag with a broken zipper. The air smelled of dust and rain, a storm having passed earlier that afternoon. Every sound felt magnified, the creak of the floorboards under my feet, the dull thud of the bag hitting the wall, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Leaving should have felt like freedom, but it felt more like stepping into a new kind of unknown. Because when numbness is all you've known, even joy feels suspicious. I thought walking away would mean I'd stopped disappearing, but I didn't know yet that the act of leaving a place doesn't mean you've left its shadow. It would take years before I learned that healing wasn't about running, but about turning around and facing what followed me. And some ghosts are made of moments you never even realized broke you. I remember the first time I tried to explain my childhood to someone. The words felt clumsy, like they didn't belong to me. We were sitting in a small cafe, the smell of burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls hanging in the air. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, blurring the streetlights into soft halos. I spoke slowly, watching the steam curl from my cup, trying to decide how much truth was safe to share. They listened, really listened, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe invisibility wasn't permanent. But then they said, "I can't imagine growing up like that." And just like that, the space between us filled again. Not with anger, not with blame, just that familiar quiet where connection doesn't quite reach you. And I realized, some things can be understood, and some things can only be carried. There were nights, even years later, when the past would come back in fragments. The slam of a door in my apartment building, the smell of whiskey on a stranger's breath in the subway. I'd be standing in the frozen food aisle, and suddenly I'd hear my father's voice. Not the words, just the tone. That sharp edge, like a match being struck. In those moments, my chest would tighten, my vision narrowing as if the present had been pulled away, was back in that house, small again. It took me years to understand that healing isn't a straight line. It's more like a tide. It goes out, and then, without warning, it comes rushing back. But each time it receded, I found I could stand a couple longer, breathe a little deeper, stay in the now a little more. That's when I realized that survival had given me something else, a quiet strength that no one had taught me, but I'd built piece by piece. And maybe that was worth holding on to. I used to think the only way to honor my story was to keep it hidden, to protect it from the misunderstanding, the pity, the casual dismissal. But one evening, I found myself talking to a young girl at a community event. She was sitting alone on the steps outside, her knees pulled to her chest, the air sharp with the smell of autumn leaves and wood smoke. I sat beside her, and without planning to, I told her something real. Not everything, just enough for her to know that silence wasn't her only option. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her eyes softened, and in that moment I felt the smallest thread connect us. It wasn't about saving her. It was about showing her that even if the world makes you small, you can still find your voice again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point of me surviving at all. To make sure someone else knew they could too. Now when I think about my childhood, I don't only see the emptiness. I see the girl who endured it. The one who learned to find light in cracks and warmth in the smallest kindness. I still remember the creak of the old wooden floor in my bedroom, the faint hum of the refrigerator at night, the smell of rain on summer pavement drifting in through the window. Those sounds and scents are no longer just reminders of what hurt me. They've become proof that I was there, that I lived through it all. And living through it means I get to choose what happens next. I'm still learning how to feel, how to love without fear, how to cry without shame. but I'm here. And every day, I'm meeting pieces of myself that I thought were gone forever. They weren't gone, they were just waiting for me to come back. Thank you for sitting here with me tonight, for letting this letter find a place in your quiet moments. Sometimes, telling a story like this feels like opening a window in a room that's been locked for years. The air comes rushing in, cold, fresh, and a little overwhelming. But you stayed, you listened, and that matters more than I can say. If you've carried your own kind of silence, I hope this reminded you that you are not alone, that your voice, even when it trembles, still belongs to you. Healing doesn't ask us to forget, it asks us to keep walking, to keep choosing ourselves, even on the days it feels impossible. I'm grateful you chose to share this time with me, and I hope, when you turn off this episode, you carry a little more light with you than when we began. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, I'll be here, waiting to share another story when you're ready to listen.